ask you first of all, Isabella, you were elected just recently on a mandate to push for reform, radical reform. Now, the figure of a 50% cut in fleets in the EU has been mentioned as the only way ahead. Do you think that this reform is going to see a real biting of the bullet by the EU, or are we going to see again a failure to do that?
Well, I hope that everyone realizes that we really need a radical reform, and overcapacity, I think, is one of the absolute crucial matters. In the last reform in 2002, they, for the first time, quit the subsidies for renewal or building of new ships. But since then, since 2002, there's been an increase in fishing capacity because of the technical creep. So
every ships are more efficient,
aren't
they?
Yeah, exactly. So this time around we have to see that we really get reductions of fleets and not only this allowing the capacity to increase. And I think subsidies is one of also the key matters.
Because at the moment the EU is still pouring money into areas that aren't necessarily providing an incentive to change. But Ian Hutchinson, if one of the ideas of this reform is to give more responsibility to fishermen, fishing associations themselves, but how can you do that if ultimately they really just want to fish more fish and they're not going to really want to cut their fleets, are they?
Well, no one has more incentive to conserve for the long-term future than a fisherman and the fishing community, because it is they who will benefit from conservation in that long term.
Hold on, I mean, you say that, but that's not been the case, has it?
That has not been the case under the Common Fisheries Policy, because what we have with the current Common Fisheries Policy, from Scotland's point of view, is the permanent threat which exists within the current CFP of equal access to waters and resources. In other words, Scots could conserve now, and they are conserving now, but under the current CFP, in the long term, some other member state could come in and benefit from the success of that conservation. We have to sweep that away and give real power not just to fishing communities but to fishing nations to manage their resources properly.
That sounds a bit like blaming other people, though. I mean, isn't part of the problem that everyone says it's the Common Fisheries Policy, it's the Commission, it's the fishermen, it's the environmentalists, it's the scientists, it's never, nobody's ever taking responsibility. I mean, what about Greece, Kriton? Do you think that you can trust the... You live on an island, don't you, in the Aegean? Syros. What are the communities there doing? They're struggling, aren't they?
There's a huge problem with the collapse of the fish stocks right now, and it's an issue of our practices, our fishing practices. It's an issue of the inability of the common fishery policy up to now to protect the fish stocks. And you know, in economics we always see we have to subsidize the resource which is in scarcity. Right now it's the fishing stocks, the fish that are in scarcity. And what the feeling is that we have to see how we are going to protect these fish stocks, because from the sustainability of the fish stocks depends the sustainability of the fishing communities.
But the fishing communities always seem to see it in the short term, and who can blame them? But they do, and my point is, how can you leave it up to them to have a greater role in managing things?
Unfortunately, not only the fishing communities, but all of us are trained to judge and make decisions based on our short-term benefits. This is a big issue for all humanity, if I may say. But in any case, we have to have greater participation of fishermen in decision-making, but also that this decision has to be based on science. So we have to have all the scientific data available. And also, when the scientific data is not complete, we have to use the precautionary principle, so that we have to protect our resource which is in scarcity.
So be more guided by the science. Now, John, your party, the UK Independence Party, has been attacking the Common Fisheries Policy for years, so you should be pretty happy it's about to be reformed.
Well, there's a few things I'd like to say, really, and a couple of points already mentioned. When the Common Fisheries Policy came through, we were absolutely right, and we highlighted the fact about the nightmare scenarios it would bring for many fishermen. If you look at the British fleet, we've lost thousands upon thousands of jobs. The industry is in tatters now because of this policy.
Well, it's also because it's been overfishing.
Well, no, hang on a second, because when this wonderful European Parliament decides to bring things in, one size fits all, they've ruined our industry. And if you look about sustainability, which they talk about, dumping fish back into the sea now, which have been caught, perfectly healthy fish for the table, tip back in, that's not sustainability.
Well, it's not the European Parliament's fault, because they've had no power yet.
But, yeah, we say that, but it's all part of the same project in a sense. And one thing I'd like to mention as well about the new commissioner that's come in, Mrs. Damanaki, whatever her name is, she stated actually in the hearings that there was one area at the moment which we haven't had much problem with, really, and that's to do with recreational sea angling. She was asked a question in the hearings about whether she would regulate for that, and she said no. A week or so later she brought it up, but she would be bringing in regulation. So the problem is with that, what we're seeing now, that area there will be one industry which is still surviving in Britain, which will be affected by this woman, because if the regulation comes in, every individuals go fishing, whether on boats or for recreational purposes or from the shore.
But they'll
be hit with paperwork.
But reform is on the table. Reform is on the table, and surely if that involves more devolution to local associations, that must be a good thing.
It's been on the table for 20 years. I just don't trust the word they say.